Now we're all familiar with this passage. God said, "Let us make man or mankind in our image and our likeness. Let them rule over the fish of the sea, birds of the air," so on and so forth. So God created man or humankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. Everybody knows this passage. And if we have questions about the plurals, we can hit that when we're done. It's actually a rare phrase. The other place you get it is Genesis 5:1. There's two other passages. This is one of them. This is the written account of Adam's line. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Similar phrasing. Verse 3, when Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness. Again, the likeness phrase, in his own image, and he named him Seth. Now, most commentators, and I would agree, would say that the language here is specifically designed to hearken back to Genesis 1:26 and let us know that whatever this imaging thing is about, it was transmitted. It keeps going after the fall. Okay, that the language here is deliberate, so that whatever it was about Adam that made him special, Adam's offspring shared that and passed it on. Okay? Here's the other passage where you get the phrase. This is after the flood, and God tells Noah, "Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed." Why? For in the image of God has God made man. This is the basis, pre-Mosaic law, for capital punishment in the Old Testament theology. And the rationale here is, when you kill a human being, and by the way, I should say, because God is going to kill lots of human beings later, and he's going to have a system of law that allows for the death penalty, so we need to make some qualifications here. Whenever you take an innocent life, a life that is not deserving of death, that has done nothing to forfeit life, okay, whenever you take a life like that, it is though you, in some sense, it's as though you killed God in effigy. Okay? God was offended that you would take the life of an innocent human being for no lawful reason, because there's something about that human being that is connected. There's a connectedness between that human being and God. And so, again, that becomes the rationale for, if you do that, then you're going to forfeit your own life as well. Now, some preliminary observations just from these texts. You'll notice, if you rehearse them in your mind, Genesis 1:26, Genesis 5:1, Genesis 9:6. Both men and women are included in what we will call for now image bearing. Okay, male and female, Genesis 1 said. The image is that which makes mankind distinct from the rest of the Genesis creation, in other words, plants and animals. The text does not teach us, however, that the image makes us distinct from angelic beings, because it's very possible, and that is my view, that the us in Genesis 1:26 refers to the heavenly host, God speaking to his heavenly host. You might have heard that it refers to the Trinity. There are some serious problems with that. Again, if we want to do that in Q&A, we can. So whatever it is, it's shared with whoever the us is. There's something about the image that makes mankind like God in some way. Since God is a person, those who image him share in his personhood. In other words, if you're going to say that there's something about this image thing, image bearing, that we share with God, there's something communicable between God and humanity. And we're distinct from the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom. Since God is a person, it's quite reasonable to assume that part of that distinction is this thing we call personhood. Okay, there's a connection there. There's nothing in the text to suggest that the image has been or can be bestowed incrementally or partially. In other words, you don't get it in stages. It seems to be described as something humanity either possesses, passes on to each human being, or not. In other words, you don't get part of it one day and then 3 months later you get another installment. Okay, there's nothing that tells you that it's incremental. Therefore, you can't speak of being partly or potentially an image bearer. And that's going to become important. And the bearing of children in some way mimics or relates to the initial creation of humankind as an image bearer. So what do we need to say? If we're going to articulate, if we're going to answer the question, what is and isn't the image of God, there are some things we need to say. However we define it, it has to make humankind distinguishably and certifiably unique in relation to any created thing that makes the physical universe its home. You've got to say at least that much. Every member of the human race must possess this image equally and to the same extent. And the image must be something shared with God's own being and nature. So if you're going to come up with some criteria, those are the ones I propose. And I want to start with what the image of God is not. I'm going to go through some common proposals. And now that you have fixed in your mind these three, okay, it's got to be unique, have to have it equally to the same extent, there's no incrementalism, and it has to be shared with God. Those three ideas, let's see if any of these proposals meet those criteria. I would suggest the image of God is not any of these things. And chances are, if you look up image of God in a theology book, you're going to find something on this list that I say, nope, it's not going to work. Intelligence, rationality, emotions, ability to know God or commune with Him, the soul, possession of a soul idea, again, whatever that is, free will, conscience, sense of morality, and the ability to communicate. You can find all of those in systematic theology books. You say, well, what don't you like about them? They can't be said to be present equally among all human beings. They can't be said to be present actually among all human beings. You can't leave anybody out. Because as soon as you leave one human being out, then that human being is divorced from personhood and, again, this thing we call the sanctity of life. In some instances, they are not distinguishably and certifiably unique to humans. But all of them fail the first two criteria. You can fail the third, too. Let's talk about equal to humans, unique to humans. Some of these faculties, again, intelligence, emotion, all that sort of stuff, are not uniformly distributed and are possessed only potentially by some human beings. Examples, the fetus. Can the fetus pray? Can the fetus think? Can the fetus communicate? And all these things are subject to definition, and they will fail somewhere along the line because the fetus doesn't have a brain. The problem with a lot of these is they're linked to the brain. That means before you have a brain, and there is a time when all of us didn't have a brain, before you have a brain, you're out of luck. Okay, if that's what the image is, then by definition, you don't have it. You say, oh, well, the little cellular little ball of whatever it is, I mean, everything's in there to make a brain, so it potentially has a brain. You're right. So we have a potential person. Why are you opposed to abortion? If it's not really a person, there's potential and actual. If it's not actually a person, what's the problem? Again, you get into some real dicey areas if you want to link the image to brain function, and even if you have a brain function. What about if brain function is destroyed? What about severe retardation? Okay, vegetative state, that sort of thing. If you're going to link it to that organ, and by the way, you're saying that the image, therefore, is obtained chronologically, okay, as you grow, which means there's a time before that point that you don't have it, and then afterwards you do. Okay, again, that's ethically pretty tenuous. If you're going to say these things, then you weaken an ethical position that has the sanctity of life as its basis. You're going to be trapped pretty quickly. Free will, conscience, sense of morality, the ability to communicate. None can be said to be held in actuality to humanity. In reference again to infants in some cases, the fetus, fertilized human eggs, zygote, severely retarded. This also presumes that no animal, not even one, as soon as you find one member of the animal kingdom, one non-Homo sapiens, okay, as soon as you find one member of the human, of the animal kingdom that can act contrary to instinct, even once, then you have a problem. Do animals ever act contrary to instinct? Do they ever portray by their actions some sort of oughtness, or, again, just something that's contrary to nature? One of the fields, if you're interested in this topic, just a little rabbit trail here, one of the fields I think you'd find fascinating is a field called animal cognition. You would be startled to know and see test results that are given equally, same test, to a chicken and a toddler. Sometimes the chicken really destroys the toddler on an intelligence test, okay? I mean, and animals do things that are contrary to nature, you know, that because, again, we've all read this stuff, you know, that an animal would react in some way to the benefit of its owner, to the detriment of itself, you know, jumping through a burning window or something like that. That isn't something the animal is born with. There's part of the brain that, okay, now I know how to jump through burning windows. Okay, I mean, that's just something that develops. It's a developmental issue. So, you know, you get into these areas that seem to overlap and tread on things that we want to be distinctly human if we want to define the image in a certain way. Communication. What about animal communication? Communication doesn't have to be verbal, does it? Certainly not. There are more than one type. There is more than one type of communication. There are a good number of examples where higher order animals can and have communicated with humans. It's the old teaching Coco the gorilla sign language. And it's not just memory work, even though that would be learning, which requires intelligence. But it's something that goes beyond just learning facts. If you've never read anything about training chimps or anything to use sign language, there are a number of them that have taken what they're taught and they form independent sentences with them. As soon as they do that once, that's intelligence. Okay, that's an independent mind creation of, you know, this information I'm given because I'm using it for a new purpose. To tell my owner to clean my cage now. Okay? I mean, there are just things like this. It's a fascinating field. We also sort of assume that communication has to occur across species for it to be real. Like your dog would have to talk to you to be really intelligent. You can't talk to your dog either. Why not within a species? Why doesn't that count? I mean, who made up that rule? A little bit more on intelligence. What if some of these other issues, if the image is intelligence, is there an intelligence threshold? Do smarter people have more of the image? What about emotional intelligence? If we're going to define it that way, if you have a higher EQ instead of an IQ, is that connected to the image in some way? And again, you can't measure these things at all when it comes to the little cellular dot that's growing inside of a woman that we want to call a person, a full human being, not a partial human being or a potential human being. Because if you're going to go there, then again, back to my questions, why do these dastardly ethical statements, why would they offend you? Artificial intelligence. It's subject to definition, but do we really want the image of God and human personhood subject to definition? Because definitions can change. Okay, that's a little it would be easy for people in that field to do a little sleight of hand or sophistry and sort of run rings around the theologian who wants to link imaging to just intelligence. ET life, what if that was a reality at some point? And a lot of people you get into religious discussion about this topic, especially the Catholic Church, who spent a lot of time on this. One of their big fears, or one of their big things they think they need to confront or deal with or have an answer for, is if you have an intelligent extraterrestrial, then that must mean that they share the image and are in need of redemption. That's a lot of theological extrapolation, which to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But if you're going to define the image in a shareable way with a non-human life form, that's the real issue. Then you got a problem, because then you're no longer unique. Soul. In part, the question depends on the origin of the soul, which we're never told about in Scripture. Where does the soul come from? Your options are biology. Let's just do a little theology, little systematic theology rabbit trail here. You have three options in systematic theology. One is called traducianism, which says that the man and woman, when they copulate and conceive a child, they create the soul of that child through the biological act. In other words, your kid doesn't just get the genetic information that you'd think that you'd associate with biology. He also gets a soul from you, the two parents. That's one view. The other view is called creationism, which has nothing to do with creationism as far as Genesis goes. But that's the idea that, no, the mom and dad just create the body, the material substance of the child, and God creates the soul. In other words, after God looks down and sees, yep, we got a conception over here on aisle 5, we need a soul to go in there. So God does that, sort of literally like pops it in there. That's view number 2. View number 3 was sort of a rare view in historical theology held by Origen, who's one of my favorite apostolic fathers or patristic fathers, because he has all sorts of weird ideas. He's just entertaining. Origen thought that God, before creation, created a specific limited number, a finite number of souls ahead of time, kind of like a soul bank, so that when humans conceived, then God didn't have to create them then. He would just like match them up. Okay, you go over there, you know, that's not your body. Your body's over here. And he just literally distributes. God is the great soul distributor. That means that Origen believed in the pre-existence of the soul, which some people try to equate with reincarnation and say that early Christianity taught reincarnation. It's not reincarnation. We don't have transmigration of souls. We have pre-existence of souls in Origen's view. So please do not diss Origen by saying that he believed in reincarnation. Humans, what we do know from the text, are animated by the breath of God. Okay, at least Adam was. And he's referred to as a living soul, the nephesh chaya. Chaya there, that Hebrew term refers to the living part. It's really a living organism, a living animal that has a nephesh, that has this thing that gets translated soul. Well, the problem is that animals are also called nephesh chaya, living souls, okay, living nepheshes. Exact same phrase used here in Genesis 1, 20 and 21, and a bunch of other places. God said, let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures. Okay, let the birds fly above the earth, so on and so forth. Every living creature, again, nephesh chaya, used down a little bit way, about halfway. So if we're going to take this language when it's used of humans and say, aha, what's unique about the human is he has a nephesh, they have a soul. No, that doesn't work either, because animals do too. Same phrase. It's kind of a dead end. Equal among humans, unique to humans. Again, what about the soul. What if it's going back to that, intelligence issue or some of the other faculties of the brain? What about emotions? Maybe the possession of, volitional will. Maybe that's the image. All these things, again, that we associate with our minds, with our brains. If we sort of go down that rabbit trail, we have a problem too, because nephesh, the word soul, and ruach, the word for spirit, are both used, to summarize in the slide, they are both used for the faculties of the mind, the will, and the emotions. They're interchangeable. So you don't get much help there because you can't really distinguish between a nephesh and a ruach, and animals have a nephesh. And, you get some that, we'll tread over into the ruach territory too. So what are we supposed to do? I would say if there is not clarity in Scripture on the nephesh or the ruach being what makes humankind unique, we probably don't want to bank all of our ethics on it. Okay, we probably don't want to stake our ethical positions, our sanctity of life positions, on things that aren't even clear in the text. We certainly don't want to stake them on things that are shared, either potentially or in real life, with other life forms that are not human. We don't want to link imaging, again, this thing we call the image, to an ability that depends on an organ that has to develop chronologically. Because as soon as you do that, you really have to be consistent. You have to abandon opposition to things like abortion up to a certain point. You have nothing to go on. You just don't. And anybody who knows the biblical text well enough, and believe me, there are people out there who are very pro-choice, who do know the text and are making these arguments. You need something better. And I'm going to give you a fairly simple suggestion, but it wouldn't be one that would occur necessarily to the naked eye. What I think the image is, it's not a thing put in humanity. It's not an attribute given to humanity. Think of it as a verb. It's a status. Part of the debate over what the image of God is concerns, again, this phrase, let us make man in our image after our likenesses. Now, as in English, we're dealing with a preposition here. Prepositions in Hebrew are used to denote different ideas. I'm going to suggest to you that the key to this, believe it or not, is how you take the preposition in. And this is an actual point of Hebrew grammar that I'm going to show you, so I'm not making it up. But I think that's the key. Let's talk about how we do this in English. If I say, put the dishes in the sink, what am I denoting? What's the meaning? Location. Put the dishes in the sink. The preposition there tells me location. If I say that something is written in pencil, what do I mean? Same preposition. Certainly isn't location. Source or instrumentality. I didn't adjust my fonts here, my pitch size. See, there you go. He broke the vase in pieces. Denotes what? Result. Here's what to say in reply. Denotes purpose or process. I work in accounting. Means what? If I say I work in accounting, what am I saying?
You may be referring to different things. One would be the type of work you do, and one other might be the location. I work in accounting.
Yes, it could. It could be the location, and the second one is the more important alternative, the type of work. Basically, if I said I worked in education or I work in medicine, it's function or capacity. That's my job. It's what I do. It's a verb. Okay? Here's my point. I think we should understand Genesis 1, 26 and 27 as meaning that humankind was created to function in the capacity of God. Let us make humankind as our image. All of this points to viewing the image in a functional sense. We are created to image God, to be Him as though He were here. Okay, we are His representatives. It's a status given to us. It's a function that we need to fulfill. I think if we take that tack, we go to the New Testament, we get some interesting results, or at least we get some interesting cross-fertilization of ideas. Paul says, we all with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another, for this comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. As we image God, we become more like Him. We are transformed from what we are into what we should be, what His intention is. In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Elsewhere, we have this idea of Christ as the, quote, express image. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. He's the best imager that there ever was. He is the imager par excellence. He is the template for our own imaging. He is what we ought to be, an imager of God. For those whom He foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son, to be more like Him, conformed to be like Him, to become Him, not in an ontological sense, but in a functional, in a works sense, in a sanctification sense. Be conformed to the image of His Son. I'm going to stop there and talk. I just want to say a few more things about this. I think the advantage to this particular view, if I can summarize it, is every person, whether through the providence of God, the sovereignty of God, again, it gets into theodicy, why is there evil? But every human being is born an imager of God. He is born, she is born with that status. It can never be taken away. It is not bestowed incrementally. It is not obtained in stages. It just is. Okay, if you are human, you are an imager of God. You are God's representative on this planet, and nothing else is. This is His domain. It's our domain because He gave it to us to be shepherd kings over it. We are Him as though He were physically here. Now, in a fallen world, again, under the sovereignty of God, some human beings will never get to do that. They will never get to live out their own role as imagers of God. Okay, they could die prematurely in the womb. They could be aborted. They could be born severely retarded. They will not be able to use the faculties that God has given in principle to humanity, the way that we are biologically made by Him. Some human beings never get to do that. But that doesn't diminish the fact that they are and were imagers, period. So, whatever happens to be conceived at the moment of conception in the womb, it can only be human, genetically. If it's multiplying cells, it's alive, scientifically, and theologically, it is an imager. It just is. It doesn't have to develop to the point of being an imager of God. It just is. And I think we are on more of a solid foundation with our ethics if we take that view as opposed to any other view that links it to an organ or chronology.